Well, good morning and welcome, or sorry, good afternoon and welcome to this month's Atlas Live, Unlocking the How of Building Soil Carbon. My name is Rafe Ritchie. I'm a pasture and grazing consultant with Atlas. Later on, we'll be joined by our Director of Carbon Services, Sean Hooben, and Sean's going to help us a little bit with the question and answer section. We'll move right on into the session. So the agenda, this is pretty simple, but it's all fairly straightforward. What builds the carbon, what keeps it there, and then some questions and answers later on. Please put your questions in the chat section in your Zoom, and we'll get to as many as we can. We've got a few that have come in earlier from some emails, so we'll hit them first, and but we'll whiz through them, and we'll try and keep to a schedule of about 15 minutes of presentation and 15 minutes of Q&A, but please fire them in. If we don't get them answered, we will look to answer them at a later date. Moving to our next slide. This is just sort of a way I like to think of it, that there's a theory, a practice, and obviously the answers. And the answers are what most people want. But a basic theory, growing plant life equals carbon, growth equals carbon. So we need growing plants. Practice, what carbon building techniques work, or what do we find work, and then the Q&A is just that Q&A. So straight in, life and carbon is pretty simple. A growing plant puts carbon down via its roots. In a very, very rough term, growing roots emit exudates. Exudates feed the microbes that sequester the carbon. But that's very, very rough way of explaining it, but it is a simple way to think of it. So we need growing roots is the answer. And what this little chart on the left here shows fantastically well is when you harvest off those too much at the top, you stop putting carbon down the bottom. And that's a really, really important thing, that you need solar panels to put carbon in the ground. So if you mow that plant too low, it stops going down. If we move across to the next chart, this is a corker. It's an oldie but a goodie, and it's been trotted around for years, but it's really, really good. And the numbers there don't lie. Once you prune off more than 40% of your foliage of a grass plant, you start to reduce the root. The roots stop growing. Sorry, and that's what we need. We need growing roots to put carbon in the soil. So if you want to keep those roots growing, you've got to keep that harvest rate below 50%. And we're talking pasture plants here. There's obviously different numbers for different types of plants, but that's a really important one, and one that can be put on the fridge if you want. We'll move across to the barriers. So removing the barriers, and this is a big one that we see a lot on the farms. We see some people doing some wonderful grazing management, and then some soil biology or soil chemistry that is out of whack, and it's stopping the carbon process occurring, sequestration process occurring. So as you see from that age-old chart that I think I've got to have, Hobart Kitchens was the website, but Yates Garden Guide, or wherever you want to look at, shows us that chart, that the pH range of where most nutrients are most available. And when we're looking to get plants to grow and grow their roots and grow our soil carbon, that's what we need. We need to remove those chemical barriers to good plant growth. It's something that as producers, we all know that chart, but it's really, really important to us to, you can have all the grazing management in the world, but if the roadblocks are there in the form of chemistry, you can't put much down on the ground. The picture across is just a lovely little example of what happens when you keep pruning that plant too much too often. And it's really, it goes back to that other slide. More roots equals more carbon, and that is just critical. And we can see that by the time we get down over here, this little joker here, we think we've actually got as much grass as we had before. We actually have for the cows to eat, but if we look down here, that's the problem. So our carbon is starting to go upwards rather than downwards. And we really need to remember that carbon is a function of the roots, not a function of the plant. of the top of the plant. Sorry. This is my favourite one. Growth. We need to grow grass or grow something to put carbon down. As we know, bamboo, fastest growing plant in the world. Ironically, it's a grass, but anyway, it's the fastest growing plant, but we can't really use bamboo across a lot of Australia. There are certain areas I'm sure we could grow it, but then what do we do with the bamboo? I don't think there's going to be much of an appetite in the world for panda tacos. So I really think that we need to focus on something a bit more achievable, and that's the grass. So whilst we love trees and we love, really good biodiversity in our pastures, cows don't eat trees as a rule, nor do sheep, but they do eat grass. And we need to be able to grow grass, a lot of grass, to put carbon down and maximise that. And so if we look at broad spectrum, broad area of Australia, we can grow grass over a fair bit of it. We can harvest that with animals and make some money that way, and then the carbon backs us up. So if we look at what's practical, the grass is the answer, and grass will actually sequester more over time than trees. But that's a different discussion for a different day. But I think it's really important to get the practical side of this. This next slide, this is one of the other big home runs. We had a couple there. The big home run obviously was the previous slide on root growth, and this one here is on grazing. So if we look at what happens when we mow that plant too much, we not only reduce our root size, but we reduce our root activity. So the problem is when roots stop growing, they actually pull back all their energy from that root, and those roots die. So to get those roots growing again, you need to actually, the plant almost needs to grow new roots. It doesn't, but in theory it does. When we practice, it does. So it's really important. If we look at that first plant on the left there, he is growing like a champ. He's been harvested. We've made use of him, and he's still putting those roots down into the ground. This guy here, we've got a bit more of a chew out of him. His roots have stopped growing for 17 days. So if we look at trying to put carbon in the ground, we want ideally 365 days of the year those roots are growing. Now, in Australia, rain's a problem, water's a problem. So if we add up lost root growing days with low moisture days, we start to get a big chunk out of our calendar. So what this is about is making it sure that every time we've got the moisture, we've got the roots that are ready to grow and ready to put the carbon down deep. And the other thing that's important here is if we look at our depths, it's really important. In time, we're going to start measuring lower and lower and lower for carbon. And if we look here, we've got 15 centimetre roots. If we look here, we've got 60, 70, 80, whatever roots. Carbon at depth is more stable. It's less transient, which means when they come and test for it, it's more likely to be there. So root depth is the key. And we also remember too, for every 1% increase in soil carbon, we lift about 180,000 litres of water or something of retainable moisture retention in the soil. So if you start to add up all that layer, the increased amount of water you can hold in that soil increases tremendously. So as we move forward to a changing climate, rain's going to be more peak and trophy, and I'd much rather be holding water all the way down there than all the way down there. So keeping it growing is that's the key. We need to make sure that our plants are ready to grow whenever we've got the moisture. And this is something that we see a lot on farms, too much bitten off too often. People have a planter and their grazing that's based a bit more around animal production and timing as opposed to grass production and timing. So we just need to shift a bit of a focus there, and we get more of this. We'll move to the next slide. How do we keep it? And this goes on. This goes on or expands from the last slide, but this is a snapshot or a bit of a screenshot of one of our CBRs, which we do free for people when they inquire. The CBR is an excellent desktop tool we use to assess someone's sort of initial viability for a project, because we're in the business of really promising people and their country, not just sort of going everywhere and any place. So these are some really great metrics that we use, and they all sort of combine together to give us a bit of a story around grazing management. But if you look here, we get our ideal target here, and hopefully you can see that, it's a bit blurry, but 25 plus paddocks per mob. But 20 is what we consider to be pretty handy, but 25, you're a bit of a rock star. That gives us that builds in, that gives you time for your paddock, for your pastures to recover from being grazed. We get here into the recovery phase, and we see here our target is 100. Well, it's not actually 100, it's 90 something, but anything above 95%, and we're starting to see pastures that have a long recovery period, which means those roots get growing back down again, and they get to effectively explore new country before they're checked again by being grazed. And then density. We talk about grazing density because we want enough cows in the paddock to make good use of the paddock. We don't want them just picking out the sweet bits. We want them to graze the entire paddock, because that gives us more usable area on our farm. You know, if you let the cows live where they want to live, they'll live in the shady hollows down by the river. What we've got to do is get them over the whole farm so that we can have a whole farm being used. It's with the price of land these days, we want to make every acre count, or every hectare, I apologise, every hectare count. So that's the important one there. So our metrics for us, better than 20 head per hectare. For sheep, it's 250 DSE per hectare. And that, of course, gets around, comes around again on, if you roll those three together, recovery time, paddock to mob ratio, grazing density, we start to see a pattern here that the grass is grazed and then it's left alone to recover. It gets back, those roots get going back previously, so to where they were previously. That's the important point, is we're making new territory. If we go back to my slide here, where is he? This one here, we've got this little guy. The roots are making less territory. We want them to be making more territory. So every time that plant grows, it pushes down further. So that's really, really important. Another part, how do we keep it? Really simple. Growing plants, making use of the moisture that's there, and healthy soil. And we do need a bit of clay. So all soils can actually, well, to a point, this is very rough, but most soils can actually put carbon down. What they can't do is actually hold it down. So we need a bit of clay, healthy soils, healthy plants, and that's the recipe for carbon. Another one, how do we do it? We've got to protect it. We've got to keep our soil surface insulated so the little wee beasties and bugs and microbes can live. We've got to give our plants enough solar panels to grow, and enough solar panels to charge sugar down into those roots and get them really punching into new territory, and a bit of species diversity. We know that the more species diversity you have, the healthier and more balanced your soil should be. And it's really about that soil health as opposed to anything else. Okay, I love this one. It is all connected. The grazing, the pastures, the soil, the soil qualities, everything wraps in together. So there's no one way of attacking this problem with one simple answer. It's an integrated approach. It's something we go through pretty strenuously in our blueprint section, and that's another part down the road. But when we come to your farm, we do what I call our blueprint, and we make a roadmap for your soil carbon success going forward. And it's very much an integrated soil chemistry, grazing, and management approach to how you do it, because it all relates. If you drop one part of the ball, drop one of the balls, you stop juggling. And like all these things, everything in farming is a balance, but it's all about sort of a holistic view of it. And the reality is that we want to achieve the most production as cheaply as possible, and have the most carbon going down as a consequence of that great production model. Another important part, got to get on top of your data. Myograzing is really, really helpful at your grazing data, but more importantly, it provides, we use it as a proof for auditing during a project. So it shows all the data you need to prove to the regulator you've actually made some changes. So grazing changes, soil amelioration changes, paddock changes, all management changes. And that's how we can get on top of the data. Using Myograzing will make the grazing monitoring and planning much more easy for you. The photos within it now make it much more easy and much more quick to really record that data, record the visual data, and you add that with the numbers, the numerical data, and you get a pretty clear sort of evidence chain for the regulator that you've been doing all the good things that you said you would do in your eligible activities. So that's a very quick and rough version, but I think it focuses on the important things, which is got to get those roots growing, and you've got to take care of your plants, and then you'll grow more grass and grow more carbon. We'll move into our Q&A section now, and we'll reintroduce Sean Hooben. Sean is Director of Carbon Services, and he comes with a wealth of experience in both carbon space, but also the regulation space for carbon. So welcome, Sean. Timing was impeccable, mate. We've got some questions, Sean. If you're happy to take a couple off the top, I'll kick off. Yep. So the first one we've got, it's come from somewhere down south. Irrigation. Can I irrigate my land if it is in a carbon project?
Yeah. So being a government method, there are kind of number of rules of activities you have to do and activities you can't do. Particularly important is you need to have one eligible activity starting after you register your project, which is going to build soil carbon, so you get additionality. So soil inputs, grazing, and a range of other ones come into that. So undertaking new irrigation is an eligible activity. So, you say happy days, but the way they define new irrigation is it's got to be irrigation water that's been created, I suppose, or added to your existing irrigation through efficiency. So to make irrigation an eligible activity, it has to be derived from efficiencies. That said, you can actually use irrigation or continue to use irrigation on your property if you have been doing so. So it won't be an eligible activity. You have to find something else to meet that criteria, but you can continue irrigating. However, there are some sort of thresholds there, which is basically it's got to be no greater than 20% of what your historical usage was. So you can't just sort of suddenly, put a massive amount of more water on your property and build the carbon that way. So yeah, irrigation can be used from efficiencies, and then if you have been using, well, I suppose in both cases you have used irrigation water, you can kind of continue with your current irrigation use, and you can increase it to a certain extent in your carbon project area. So yeah, you just got to have a bit of a chat about what you're doing now and how you might fit into those two criteria.
That is a good answer, Sean. It's like a lot of this stuff. It's involving government. There's a lot of ifs and buts, but yeah, it's as high as the wide, as deep as it's tall, isn't it? Next one. This is another good one. How do I show I have undertaken a new eligible activity to meet the additionality test?
Yeah. So I suppose that one flows on a bit from this. So like I said, there's a whole range of activities that can be classified as an eligible activity. And I ran through a few of them. Pasture improvement's another one. And you can use legumes and other things like that. So basically, you've got to find one new thing to do. The basic idea is that you can't be storing carbon and receiving ACCUs if you're not doing anything new, because that's just business as usual. So additionality is basically saying, based on the last 5 years, we've done this, but after we register our project, we are going to take on at least one new activity. And you can do 2, you can do 3, but it's got to be at least 1. And I suppose when you do your registration, you have to sort of set that out clearly to the regulator, saying, yeah, like I say, your 5 years prior is your baseline, and then you kind of go, we are doing a whole lot of, grazing intensification, pasture improvement, adding soil inputs, and that's how we're going to build carbon. That's your starting point. And then I think Rafe was referring to Maya grazing and how it can be used through your project to actually record and measure what you're doing. And then when you go back to the regulator in 5 years or 3 years to sort of show them what you've done, show them your carbon measurement, but also show that you've actually done what you said you would do as far as a new activity, all the data's there. And they also have independent auditors coming in, looking at the books and going, okay, you said you were going to, have, more fencing and add certain soil inputs. And then basically through Maya grazing and the record keeping there, it makes it a lot easier to kind of just have the evidence ready to roll. And you can clearly show that you've done the activity and that you meet the additionality test.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I think it's really important that they've got to be able to prove and show that you've changed. I think that's the big difference, really. That's the key thing there, isn't it? That we have changed what we do on this farm.
Yeah, and I suppose that's what we do with the blueprint process. We take a look at your property, we go out there and we make a range of recommendations which are going to sort of benefit both grazing productivity and soil carbon. And like I said, you can just choose one of those activities to be your official eligible activity, but you can still do the range of other activities that are recommended, because that just makes sense to sort of give your productivity and your soil carbon as big a boost as possible.
Thanks, mate. The next one I've got here is how do I know whether to focus on grazing management, soil inputs, or pasture renovation? Is this the right approach for my farm? I reckon I'm a crack at this one. The reality is, it's, as I said in one of those slides, it's all connected. If the key to growing carbon is growing grass, growing biomass, really. So if you go bananas on a soil inputs program but don't graze it properly, then the plants will die through overgrazing, undergrazing, whatever. So it's really about that integrated approach and more holistic approach, which is, as Sean referred to in the blueprint, we might only have one eligible activity for the regulator to qualify as a carbon project, but it doesn't mean you don't continue to manage in a holistic sort of manner and use all the tools in the tool chest to grow that carbon. So the focus really comes about what we find is when we do our CBRs, when we do our cost benefit reports, when we do our blueprints, we often find an area that the farmers are really good, the producers are really good at, and some areas that they could pick up on. And so when it comes to what area do I focus on, maybe it might be, hey, you're really strong here and you need to pick up a bit here to get the production and get the biomass production up. So the CBR, so the cost benefit report will indicate some of those things. That will show an area that you could improve in, or might show an area. And the blueprint process we go through at the start of a project really will show areas that we think that some improvement can be made. So there's no magic bullet, but we do line up a fair few things in the scope when we go through these approaches, and we can definitely see some areas for improvement. So Sean, I reckon we'll both share this one a bit. This last question I've got here, it's are there any things I can look for prior to baseline or testing, getting started, to help me know if my property is a good prospect for a carbon project? I'll dive in and you can follow me up, mate. But I think we want to see a bit of clay in the soil. That's very helpful. It's not the only thing, and don't think for a second that a bit of sand or a bit of loam is the end of the world. But we need a little bit of clay, and we need you to be able to grow grass and graze animals. So if you can do those things, they're important, and a bit of scale helps too. Sean, you got anything there?
I'll probably leave that one there. I sort of jump into some of the ones that have just come in as we're speaking, Rafe, just so we give them a bit of time. I might jump to Chris Gray first, because firstly,
Thank
I
you.
want to apologise. He said that you tried to engage with us for Q-Rider funding and didn't get a response. I'm not sure how that happened, but happy to have a chat to you about that. And just briefly on your question there, talking about scale and viability, whether it's veg carbon or soil carbon. Yeah, there definitely are scale issues and cost and return matters for both, various veg ones and soil. Probably one thing worth mentioning is there's this new thing being developed called the integrated farm and landscape management method, where you can do on one property both veg and soil carbon. It's still a work in progress. The government's going through consultations, but the idea is that it'll bring down the costs and bring up the carbon credit generation. So properties which didn't have viable soil carbon projects or veg carbon projects, when you bring them together, they can be viable. So it's worth keeping that in your back of your mind. There's going to be stuff coming out later this year. But yeah, I'll get your contact details, Chris, and we can chat about that a bit more. And
Thanks.
then if we have time, Rafe, there's one more which might be yours.
I've got the one, Promode, I think it is. Relation between bulk density and carbon. We view bulk density in a couple of ways. Once again, our focus is on growing more grass. So bulk density, if it's too high, it means too much compaction, means the roots can't get into the soil. That's a bad thing. So we would, from the grass production point of view, we would look at that as something that we would need to, put some effort into. If it's too high or if it's too low, some effort there too. Not that it really can be. As far as soil carbon goes, the amount of carbon in your soil is a relation, is actually worked out in relation to bulk density. So in very rough terms, very rough terms, the more density you have, the less space there is for everything else. But also too, the more carbon that can be about, but on the back of that, with less space between the soil, the less carbon can be stored. So there's a sweet spot for it. There is a relation, but that gets more into the regulator space than our space. What we more use bulk density for is a factor of farming and how to make your grass more productive. Okay, so we've got one from Bruce here. Okay, this will be for you, Sean. In rangelands, would planting Leucaena or old man saltbush be considered a viable activity for increasing carbon?
Yeah, so you just have to look under which eligible activity it kind of fits. Like, they're kind of a bit broad, so you kind of have to look if it's probably could fall under pasture improvement. So a lot of that stuff can be worked in. The one issue you've got to look at is you've got a CEA carbon estimation area, and generally what the regulator is looking for is a good coverage across that. So yeah, for any property, you can look at a range of activities, but pasture improvement, if it's going to be widespread enough to tick that box on coverage of your carbon estimation area, it could be a go. So you just need to sort of dig into some of the detail there.
Excellent, thank you, Sean. Well, I think that about covers it. We are actually just about out of time, so I've got some more questions there, which we'll get back to you later on, guys, privately or in a future webinar. We'll just move on to a couple of little things to remind everyone that we have a cost benefit report that we do, which is the initial investigation into your suitability for a carbon project, and as it says there, it's totally complimentary, and it works out, it establishes roughly if it's a suitable thing for you to have a look at, which is really important. Go to the website, and I think if you look at that one there's a thing you can scan to get it. atlascarbon.ag will get you there. Thank you, Sean, for your help today. It's been wonderful. Thank you, everyone who's joined in. Thank you for the questions. We'll look to have another one of these next month, and we'll keep the information coming, and hopefully we'll see some of you producers down the road. Thank you and good afternoon.
So